Hi, sure. Hi, Meg. Nice to see you. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here today. I found myself earlier feeling a little bit of those kind of jittery energy feelings before doing any talk like this. So I had some excitement, some nervousness by doing such a big speech to a large group. So I popped out for a walk. Found myself in a cafe drinking strong coffee and eating empanadas. So I'm not really sure that that actually worked. But anyway, let me tell you a bit about myself. So, for those of you trying to guess the accent, I'm Irish. I grew up in Ireland. I came to London to university to study, and then I put down roots here. So, I've lived in London now for longer than I've lived in Ireland, which is a very strange feeling. I still visit home quite often, and if anything, just to refresh my accent and catch up with my family. But during my university years, I lived in different countries. I studied and worked across Holland, Belgium, France, UK, Ireland. So had quite an early experience into understanding the differences between different cultures and different employment frameworks, which was quite interesting. I was studying European business studies, and when I was doing my placement at one company, I was in a HR department, and I realized that actually I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the work they did, and I felt like I found my calling. And so here I am. I've worked in HR ever since I left university. So if I think about my step into management, reflecting back to what feels like a long time ago, I was lucky that I was mentoring an admin function, and there was a lot of changes that needed to happen there. And I was obviously in a business facing role, so I was getting a lot of feedback, and I could help them work on maybe some of the processes and thinking a little bit more about that customer experience when you think about the internal employee as a customer. I also had done quite a lot of learning through my degree and through my HR qualification. And so those things really helped me along the way and made it a bit of an easier transition, making that first move. So before I kind of jump into some of the depths of this, I've got a story that I want to share that I was thinking about today on my walk, and it was probably the strong coffee that really got me to this. When I was quite young, my father ran his own business. It was an accountancy firm. He employed about 15 people. And one of the things that really stands out in my memories is there was a wall chart with all of the holidays on the chart. And my dad was on there tracking his holiday amongst everyone else. And I used to say to him, "Why are you doing that? You're the boss. You can take holiday when you like. Why would you track your holiday like everyone else and limit yourself?" And I could never quite understand what he was trying to get across to me until I went into employment and started to become an employee and then a manager, and realized what he was trying to explain was the importance of leading by example. And as a someone then moving into management, reflecting on that was really important for me, with that such an early lesson about how much you set the example for other people and people look up to you. And it's not a case of do what I say, not do what I do.
Yeah, I mean, it really does kind of illustrate leadership, and it illustrates a certain type of leadership too, right? It illustrates a leadership that is servant leadership, that is leading from the back, not just from the front. Like there's a lot of things that go into that, and really does kind of highlight a very strong character feature for your dad. Like that's wonderful. And it really does kind of highlight the dichotomy that a lot of people approach management with, which is what are the perks as opposed to what are the increased responsibilities that come with this.
For sure.
I like that. All right. So if people are interested in becoming a manager or moving up into a managerial role, what steps should they be taking to develop themselves or set themselves up for, the best possible outcomes?
I think one of the really important things is to work on your own emotional intelligence. And you'll find that that's going to be a theme as you think about the different angles of management once you become a manager. So, developing self awareness, what are your strengths and weaknesses as a person? What drives you, but also what derails you? And what are the things that really kind of can wind you up? And how do you manage that? And the effect that you have on other people as well. And I think that's probably a really important aspect once you become a manager, to be able to use what you learn in the early stages and apply those techniques and maybe self controls in some case. So understanding that self regulation. Do you act before you think? Can you manage your emotions in difficult situations? Maybe thinking about how easily you build relationships. And if you don't easily build them, what gets in your way? What are those barriers for you? And how do you bring down those obstacles? Do you show empathy? Empathy is a really important aspect of management. And how can you improve on that skill? So that's, I think, one really important area to do some kind of self-reflection analysis, and maybe some self-work. There's lots of other things that you can do proactively. So maybe ask a colleague or a friend who's a manager for their journey and some of the things that they learned in their early stages of moving into management. There's so much material available on the internet to do self-learning, whether that's reading, whether it's courses, and of course old-fashioned books, which we talk less about these days. I think if you can find opportunities in the workplace, such as mentoring other people, even if that's informally, maybe that's a new colleague that you're going to take under your wing and buddy. Maybe it's a recently promoted peer who's coming up to your level in a more senior role that you could perhaps provide some mentoring and coaching. I think the other things that people think about less are participating in a project in the workplace, or taking advantage of networking opportunities, or even charity work, that you can use those opportunities to enhance your communication skills, to build those relationships I mentioned, to share ideas and expand your experience and your understanding. And all of those things will help support you as you make that move into management. The other thing I would say as a final thought is the importance of active listening. And we have a tendency, most people, particularly when we're moving fast through a working day, to listen in order to respond. We're not necessarily actively listening. And by active listening, I mean you're giving your full attention to what someone's saying, you're understanding what they are trying to say, not what you're trying to hear. And you're responding with a thoughtful comment, or maybe not even responding at all because they might not even want a response. So I think those are some of the things that I would suggest as steps and actions to do in advance of becoming a manager, if that's an area of interest for somebody's career path.
Absolutely, yeah. Should you also treat, like your manager or your team members as resources here? Is this something that you can ask, should we have conversations with managers or with coworkers about this, or about that desire to be in management?
For sure. I think it's really important to be open to hearing from other people, particularly people that interact with you, about their experiences of engaging with you. It's one of the things that I don't think we're very good at as human beings, is soliciting feedback. And that generally, I think, really can support us in our own development and understanding how we resonate with other people. Because we might think that we come across very well and we're good at relationship building, but that might not necessarily be the case. So being able to solicit it and take on board feedback, I think, is a really positive skill.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one thing to want to do the job. It's quite another to want to do every aspect of the job. And so I think it is really important, especially when you're looking at management, like, changing roles to move into management. You have to think about, okay, what am I not thinking about? Like,
Yeah.
what's going to change? What about this is not like any other position that I've held within the team or within the org, or whatever. All right. I have a lot of thoughts on the subject, having had a lot of managers in my 37 years on the planet. What do you think makes a great manager?
I did a lot of reflection around that point. And one of the challenges I think we currently have is we're so flooded with information. You go on to social media, you read articles that are sent to your email, and there's so much opinion, and so many comments about the importance of the role of the manager. And I think there's a risk that it becomes overwhelming. But one of the things that I think is to just I've picked some core areas that I want to just focus in on for the conversation, because the risk is that I could sit here for an hour and just talk about so many different angles of management. I would suggest the most important thing is having a learning mindset and being open to continuous self improvement, because management is a journey. And I don't think there's anyone who could actually hold their hand on their heart and say, do you know what? I've got it. I've mastered this. I'm the perfect manager. And so being able to see that as an ongoing journey, and being able to adapt along the way, whether that's improving on certain skills, maybe it's a learning situation that you're working with somebody who's a different style of employee than what you've managed before, maybe it's a challenge in your team. There's always ways that we can reflect, self-improve, and continue to learn. So I think that's the most important thing. And then it's about applying your emotional intelligence. And I mentioned this earlier when I talked about that development part to become a manager. I think emotional intelligence is such an important piece. And I just want to share one of the breakdowns, I guess, of that for a minute as I think about emotional intelligence. A writer called Daniel Goleman, I think, quite nicely broke it down into different elements, which is self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. And being able to bring all of those to your management style and how you engage with your team and manage your team, I think is going to create real opportunity to build positive, engaging relationships and to gain the trust of your team. And those are really important. Another aspect is being willing to be vulnerable and show authenticity. And I think that's perhaps a newer concept for us when we think about management. You go back, 10, 20 years ago, we didn't talk about authenticity and vulnerability. But I think they're really important. And there's certainly an expectation now that we don't put on a false facade in front of our employees when we're managers, and that we are willing to share stories, to share insights, but in a positive way. And sometimes I come across managers who they're airing a lot of personal opinions, and they're not always positive, and that actually can be quite damaging to the team. So it's important to be positive in applying vulnerability and authenticity, and to be able to acknowledge your own mistakes and challenges to the team, because they'll probably see them. So that willingness to recognize and be transparent, I think, is important. When it comes to actions as a manager, one of the most important things is communication. And by communication, that has many different elements to it. I was just doing some kind of research into data to bring to this conversation. And I found a survey from a company called Interact, and they found that 69% of managers said that they're often uncomfortable communicating with employees. So I think this is a really important area for anybody who's an existing manager or wants to go into management to double down on, is the importance of communication and how to be an effective communicator. Mm-hmm. So sharing what you expect from the team, or sharing what you think success looks like, providing regular updates or company information to make sure that they feel connected, and aligning them to the organizational goal and values. That's one important piece. Another one is all around feedback and coaching, not just giving it, but also being willing to take the feedback and even solicit the feedback, and recognizing and highlighting the efforts of your team. Praise and recognition go so far as a manager. And often I think they're more important than physical benefits. I think praise and recognition really does have a powerful impact, more than often we realize. I think another aspect is making sure that you follow through. Don't skip one-to-ones, don't cancel team meetings. If you say you're going to do something, do it. I think that not following through damages credibility and trust. And I've seen a lot of that in my experience. And I hear people saying it to me, my manager doesn't even invest the time in me to do my performance reviews at the time that they're due. Or my manager always cancels my one-to-ones and I don't feel like I have appropriate time. Or even the quality of a one-to-one is so important, because the risk is that somebody just feels they get talked at. Another angle to that is also being willing to take difficult but fair decisions and address issues before they become bigger in the team. So getting that respect from the team to be fair, but make those difficult decisions when you have to. Going back to the emotional intelligence, I think just showing empathy is also something that's really important. So taking an interest in your team, learn about their families, learn about their personal interests, ask what they did at the weekend or what are they going to do at the weekend, and make sure that you support them and be kind to them when they need it. So I think all of those things really lend themselves to building an invested relationship. And I think that's the big difference, is that it's invested or feels invested to the person. Another area that I would probably also highlight is seeing yourself as a guide and a support. You're not there necessarily to tell, you're there to empower the team and help them achieve. And I always think that being a successful manager for me is bringing out the success of my team. So when my team is successful, I'm successful, and that's part of me doing my job appropriately.
I mean, if I had had even one manager that believed a third of what you talked about 15 years ago, I mean,
Yeah.
let's talk about how the trajectory of things could be completely different. But like I mean, you are really highlighting a ton of very good points that are a lot of these are soft skills, right? A lot of these are things that, and when I say soft skills, I mean that in the highest form of praise, but I know that when a lot of times other people talk about soft skills, it's in a pejorative, right? It's like, okay, great, you can talk to people, but like, do you understand the software that we need you to understand or something? And granted,
I totally agree, Meg. And I think if I look at situations where I see managers not being successful, the lack of social skills is usually the key.
yeah, that's huge. Well, and plus it also comes down to, like you talked about, the emotional intelligence and the flexibility to understand what management different people might need from you, whether or
Mm.
not that is your strong suit. Like, yeah, develop your skills as a manager, develop what you feel is your most authentic management style. That's all awesome, very important. But you also have to remember part of managing is managing the people you have, not turning them into someone that you can manage, right? You have to work with what you're given. So I think that is really good. Like, let's talk about some of the things that new managers should watch out for. Are there more common mistakes or more, detrimental mistakes that you see be very common when it comes to people that are new to the role?
Yeah, I've seen people try too hard, and feeling like they have to be in charge and take control. And I think that's a huge mistake. You have to build the relationship as the priority and get the trust from the team. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful in managing that group. When you think about making difficult decisions or landing feedback or having to manage through a tough time, it's by having the relationship and having the respect with the team that you can support them through that. So I think that for me is one of the key call outs. Another thing that I see is where somebody steps into management and they feel like they have to know everything. And sometimes that either manifests itself as not willing to hear what somebody else has to say, or it can manifest itself as trying to be the smartest person in the room. And managers don't have to know it all. They're actually there to manage. And by that, it is all what we talked about on the soft skills, getting the best out of the team, helping them be productive, getting obstacles out of their way if it's affecting their productivity, and helping them enjoy work and be happy. So I think that I would counsel anybody who has that nervousness of, but my team know things I don't know. That's okay. It's
Yeah.
about using your social skills and your emotional intelligence to get the best from them.
Yeah. And I love how many times here we're coming back to communication, but what we're really coming back to is trust, right? Like you talked about earlier, like don't cancel your one-on-ones, don't cancel your team meets without, reason, obviously, because you're the person that calls them. So it's not like anybody else is going to feel like, okay, but I actually need this time. So I very much appreciate, this idea and this kind of this focus on what is the message you're sending with what you're doing, right? Are you underlining and underscoring yourself, or are you undercutting what you've tried to communicate to your team?
Yeah, and I see people who put forward work that the team has done and presented as their own, and that is absolutely a relationship killer.
Right?
And
Like, in what world would anyone be okay with that, with somebody else doing that to them? Right? It boggles the mind.
But it's amazing how many times I hear it from team members saying, "I've got no respect for my manager. I know that they take my work and pass it on as if they did it." Um, One of the other aspects on becoming a new manager that I think is challenging is when you move to become the manager of your peers.
Yeah.
And I think that has to be one of the toughest situations to go into when you're a first time manager. And I just wanted to kind of call out some things on that for a minute.
Yeah,
Um,
please.
I think it's really important to recognize the challenge, and to ask the team what they need from you and how you can help them. And some of it is back to the point I was making about not feeling like you have to know everything and be more superior from a knowledge point of view. But you want to establish yourself as a leader by hosting the meetings, establishing those clear expectations and setting direction for the team, being seen to make the decisions and have engaging one-to-ones. So I think that although it's a more challenging situation, it really is just doubling down on pretty much the same things to make sure that they recognize you as the manager, but being open to hear what they have to say.
Mhm. I like this. Well, and it also kind of goes to show that there's a lot of times when we have transitions in life that we don't really recognize until after the fact, right? Like, oh yeah, and I suddenly I was no longer into this hobby, I was into that one, or our lives changed, and so I haven't seen that person in a while. This is a state of change that you plan for. This, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like overnight they're like, poof, you're the manager, bye, have fun. So, I think it is really important that we talk about it like that and you think about it in those terms, right? What is going
Mm.
to change? There are going to be things that have to change because your
Yeah.
role within the team has changed. And the team has
Yeah.
changed in it, in its makeup because you're not doing the same role that you were. So yeah, I very much appreciate this.
But
Um,
again, it's back to those social skills that we talked about. It's the empathy, it's the self reflection. So,
yeah,
it's that common theme that runs through this conversation is all about emotional intelligence.
yeah. All right. So a big part of the kind of uh, good ingredients that we're adding up here to be a good manager. One of the things that you've talked about is successfully giving feedback and coaching. What does it look like to do this successfully? Because I feel like doing it and checking the box is completely different than how this might be a successful matter as opposed to, yeah, I did it. But did you?
Yeah, yeah. Dump and run.
Yeah.
There's various models that you can use that can help kind of how you construct feedback. And according to Google, the most common one used is SBI, which is situation, behavior, and impact. So you break down your feedback into what was the situation, how did the person behave, and what was the impact of that. There's others that you can put in place in the same way, but I think it's really important that when you're sharing feedback, it's non-judgmental and it's fact-based, because that is far more likely to land than you passing some kind of an opinion. And secondly, to use specific examples at the time that they happen, because a specific example will allow somebody to relate and reflect back. And doing it on time, they will still have it in their memory. And so it's much easier for someone to then acknowledge and accept it and maybe do something about it. I often hear managers saying, when I get to their performance review at the end of the year, I'm going to tell them about that. And you think, whoa, no, you've got to do it at the time. And a performance review should never be a surprise. Anything you talk about that is critical feedback needs to already have been shared at some point in time. It might be a collation of things or it might be a reinforcement, but ideally it should have already been shared. When it comes to coaching, I think it's really important to highlight that coaching is not telling. And that, I think, is sometimes something that we wrongly perceive as how we coach. It's soft skills based, and it's about motivating and guiding and sometimes developing the team for something new. So it's really important to use active listening, to have effective communication, to use questioning techniques to draw out maybe what the person should have done or how they could approach a situation that's challenging for them. Using insightful questions and being optimistic about helping somebody find the path forward. Sometimes it could be somebody stuck and you want to use some questioning techniques to maybe help them find the way. But it's all around compassion and empathy and helping them see the end of the line.
Like this. I think that's a really, I've always heard that good managers really exist as like quarterback role, right? You're not the coach, you're not that far off the field, you know what's going on, but you're not really the one running. You're not the one catching, you're not the one making plays. And so to be that effective quarterback, like you have to know what's going on at all times, which is wild. But yeah, you do have to be able to give that feedback to the people around you and then take in whatever responses come from that, right? Because at the end of the day, this is a team. You are leading everybody, all the parts are supposed to work together.
Yeah. And
Um,
a lot of people shy away from feedback because they fear negative
yeah,
response or reaction. And at the end of the day, you're doing someone a disservice, because if they need that feedback, it's far better to do it at the time in a non-judgmental way than find it builds up and you actually have a bigger problem further down the line.
yeah. Well, and it also goes back to trust, right? I trust that if I tell you this, then we can do something about it. I mean, the second you talked about that person saving their like, I'm gonna tell them about this at their performance review down the road. I mean, all I could think was like, you're giving your own employee the silent treatment basically, and then expecting things to change. This doesn't make any sense. Um, all right. So last question I have for you.
Mhm.
Ways that we can foster inclusion and belonging in our own teams. Obviously, this is going to depend situation to situation, but where should people start?
This is so important right now. I think generally there's an expectation from employees that they want to belong to something meaningful and they want to feel included. But I think the world that we're in right now adds another level of need for this, but also to some degree complexity as well. Generally, I think it comes back to the empathy and respect, creating a safe space for the team and being authentic yourself and encouraging authentic conversation. Um, Helping the team to feel connected and have purpose in their role. So some of that is going back to that good manager piece as well of connecting them to the goals and the purpose of the company so that they feel that sense of belonging back. And ensuring that everybody has airtime and feels comfortable in sharing their opinions. And that sometimes is a challenging thing to deal with when you don't feel like everyone is getting the opportunity to speak or feels comfortable sharing. That might need some sidebar conversations to say, hey, I need you to maybe step back a little bit in meetings and let some other people have an opportunity to speak, or I need you to be less opinionated sometimes. So it's more than just the dynamic in those team conversations, but sometimes it's also doing work outside or maybe encouraging someone to speak up to say, you have good ideas, I'd like to hear it more. So I think, we're back to the soft skills again. If we think about that, I actually came across a study by Ernst and Young, and 87% of participants said empathy is essential for an inclusive environment. So, it's just interesting and how these themes constantly run through. But I think a really important thing right now is don't avoid difficult conversations. And sometimes people feel like it's the elephant in the room and the manager avoided stepping into it. I think it's important for authenticity to have courageous conversations in a safe space. And so that's why it's really important to build that trust and safe environment amongst the team. But if you're facing into something that could be a very difficult conversation, given some of the world events, seek some advice, take some counsel from other people about how you might step into it and maybe what you might want to avoid in opening up a difficult conversation. But don't shy away from it, because that is a part of inclusion and belonging, that we recognize difficulties, and that we share maybe concerns, and interests across the team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not surprising that I'm agreeing literally with everything you're saying, but I mean, truly, like I can't top this. Like this is solid advice. So I hope y'all are listening to everything Fiona is saying today. All right, we're almost out of time. If people are
Yep.
only going to take one thing from today, what should it be?
I think it's the emotional intelligence and how that relates to management, and the fact that you can do the pre work on that before you move into management. Some people assume that when I get to management, then I'll start doing the work that's needed. It's not the case. And I think, anyway, as individuals, we should be looking to develop our emotional intelligence generally anyway. But for me, I think that's my biggest call out today.
Love it. Fiona, thank you so, so much. It's been wonderful to get to learn from you and get to know you a little bit more today. I thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise. We're really, really grateful.
Thanks. Have a good day, everyone.